Hi, I am Evelyn Hatfield. Here is a face for my name. So this exam, I decided to do the learning activity that was labeling the need-to-know structures on the skull and taking pictures of yourself, pointing out these, or a video. Unfortunately, with COVID, I don't have a skull. Amazon could not deliver one in time for me to do it today, and I don't have access to any of the skulls that would be at the JC library or any labs or anything like that because COVID, of course. So I will be using the flashcards that I printed out and made for our skull practical. The first one we have is the frontal bone. Next, we have the supraorbital foramen. We have the frontal sinus. The anterior cranial fossa. The parietal bone. The temporal bone. The external auditory meatus. The mastoid process. The styloid process. The zygomatic arch. The zygomatic process, which is just a little bit more of a condensed area. The cartoid foramen. I remembered this one because the arrows are pointing behind, and when you walk behind a cart, that's how you push it. The petrous portion. The occipital bone. The occipital condyle. The foramen magnum. And I have to make this joke. So I remembered this one because foramen sounds like for a man, kind of, and Magnum is a condom brand for a man. So sorry for the inappropriate joke, but sometimes that's how you have to do it. Upside down. The jugular foramen. The posterior cranial fossa. The external occipital protuberance. The coronal suture. Perpendicular to that is the sagittal suture. We then have the squamous suture. Then the lambdoid suture in the back, as if I could baa like a sheep. The sutural bones. The sphenoid bone. The optic foramen. The Sheila turcica. Sorry if I butchered the pronunciation on that one. The sphenoidal sinus. Foramen lacerum. Foramen rotundum. Foramen ovale. Foramen spinosum. Pterygoid process. The lesser wings. And then the greater wings. the ethmoid bone, the ridge on the ethmoid bone is the crista galli. The plate on the ethmoid bone is the cribriform plate. And then the last one for the ethmoid bone is the holes, the olfactory foramina. And then the ethmoidal sinus. We then have internal nares, the maxilla, infraorbital foramen, incisive foramen, and then the airspace in this bone is the maxillary sinus. The alveolar processes on the maxilla bone. The palatine processes, palate expanders. Inferior nasal conchae. I only got this one wrong 75 times while I was memorizing these. The vomer. Here's another zygomatic arch. The lacrimal bone. And then the spot inside of that circle was the lacrimal fossa. The nasal bones. The zygomatic bone. The temporal process on the zygomatic bone. The palatine bone. Again with those palate expanders, I have trauma. The mandible. The coronoid process of the mandible. The condylar process of the mandible. The mandibular foramen. The mandibular notch. The mental foramen. Ramus. The body of the mandible. The angle of the mandible. Your front teeth, the incisors. Your sharp teeth, canines. The molars that fall out, the premolars. Your permanent from the beginning teeth, the molars. You don't get to get a cavity in those ones and lose them. If you get cavity in that one, you're stuck. The malleus, and this is the middle ear ossicle. The incus, also a part of the middle ear ossicle. And then the last part I'm showing of the middle ear ossicle is the stapes. I then have some on the fetal skull. This one is the anterior fontanelle. A little bit lateral from that one would be the anterolateral fontanelle, also on the fetal skull. The next one on the fetal skull is the posterior fontanelle. And then laterally from that is the posterolateral fontanelle, also on the fetal skull. And then my last structure also on the fetal skull is the mental symphysis. I again apologize for not having an actual skull to point these out on. I wish I did. I wish we were in some different times right now. But those are the need to know structures on the skull.